Okay, so I hope that you all can see my screen, okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so today's presentation, as Maria mentioned, it's on the payables management in Dynamics GP. This is to give you all an insight of how to conduct payables transactions, and hopefully your takeaway is with a little bit more knowledge than you came here with. So within Dynamics GP, we have two sections. We have the sections running from the purchase requisition straight to the purchase order generator that's dealing with purchase order processing. And then we have the other section which deals from the transaction entry straight down to the edit 1099 transaction information. This section deals with payables transaction. So this transaction entry window is split into two setups, one being purchase orders and purchase order processing, and one being payables transaction. Once we click on the transaction entry window, you're entered into the payables transaction entry window. All right. So here we're going to select a vendor. And when we bring in our vendor, you're going to see the address information that comes in. My address is set to primary, as well as the payment terms and the default currency. All of that information is defaulted. Here I'm going to enter my document number, and the document number would be your vendor invoice number. Now, if you have a purchase order number from the vendor, you can also include it here. Then you can input your purchase amount. Good. So what I have on my screen is basically what you need to enter for an invoice, right? Now, in the same screen, you are able to enter miscellaneous charts, returns, credit memos, etc. on the same screen. Now, if I were to go to distribution, and now, by the way, if there are any taxes would be calculated here by default based on your vendor ID. If the tax is not calculated by default, you can input your tax by clicking on the blue expansion arrow. And the tax is captured here. However, the tax rate is worked out to 0. Right? So this is why we have 0 as the default. If I was to go to the distribution area, now distribution, meaning that the GL account has been affected by this transaction. Right? So here we are seeing the debit account, and we are also seeing the credit account. Just notice that the GL did come in by default, and this GL did come from the vendor ID. So if I was to go to the vendor, so if I was to bring up Ace Travel, let me minimize this for a sec. And if I was to bring up Ace Travel vendor, and we click the accounts button, you would see that the GL accounts have been set up against this vendor already. And that is where the GLs would have come from. Right? So notice that these GLs did come in by default, and these GLs, like I said, did come from the vendor ID. All right. Now there are 3 levels of posting in GP. right? There's the transaction level posting and there's batch level posting. Transaction level posting means that you enter the invoice, you do not insert the batch ID, right? So if you were going to do a transaction level posting, you would create the invoice, you would not insert the batch ID, and you would click post, right? You cannot save. If I try to save, of course, I'm going to get an error message that's stating that it's looking for a batch ID to save this transaction to. As long as there isn't any batch ID, it means that you're going to post from this window. It means that you're doing it on a transaction level. Okay. Now, if you're doing a batch level posting, it means that you're saving to a batch ID, and then you go to that batch and you post from that batch screen. So if I was to enter a batch, right, this batch does not exist, so we are prompted to add the batch. The checkbook is going to come up as default, and you can change your checkbook accordingly. Now, we are not processing any payments, so any checkbook will do. Right, so now that the transaction has been saved to a batch, it means that we have to go to the batch to post. So we are able to save this here. Right, and if, for instance, I was to click post, so I could just show you, if I have a batch ID and I was to click post, I would get an error message stating that I cannot post because the transaction is currently assigned to a batch. So it means now we have to go to that batch and post. All right. So now that we have saved our transaction to a batch, we are now going to go to the payables batch entry window. So we're going to batches. And here we are going to look for our batch ID. Right? So this is the batch. And our next step would be to print an edit list, especially if there were multiple transactions in this batch. Right? Currently, I only have one transaction in this batch, but typically you would save multiple transactions to the batch, and it's always advisable to print the edit list before, right? You can print the edit list to review, right? Or you can go back to the transaction and review the transactions there. But we are going to print the edit list just to make sure that all is well. Let's see if okay, so let me try printing this to file. Okay, so I may have some issues with the report printing. Let's see if I'm able to print to. Okay, so I currently have some issues with my report printing, but that's not a problem. All right, so once you print the edit list report, if there's any errors on it, you are going to see usually, and not 100% of the time, usually you would see an error message. For instance, you would see an error message that may relate to maybe the distributions may be missing, or your fiscal period that you're trying to post to is closed, or maybe a particular GL account that you're currently using is inactive. All right, so that is going to allow you to know that you're going to have to now edit the transaction, save that transaction again before you're able to print and post. Because if you go to post with errors, what is going to happen is that you're going to have that batch hang in GP, and it's not going to post, and you would have to go to the batch recovery window to access the batch to recover it, right? So just remember, if there are errors within the batch, the posting would never complete. It could also be dangerous because what tends to happen, the posting may start and then the transaction may partially post. Now, as I mentioned, most of the time when there are errors, they would be located on the batch edit report, but there are also instances where the error only shows itself once you post, right? Now, when you click post, like I mentioned, what tends to happen as well, the GP is then going to run checks on that batch, right? So there are instances where only when you click the post button that happens, and then it will be taken to the batch recovery window where you can recover the batch and then see the errors that presents itself within the batch edit list. So if it does go into the batch recovery window, just remember to recover the batch and then print the edit list to see what was wrong with the batch and what caused it to go to the batch recovery, and try to fix that before you post again. Okay, so we did an invoice only, right? So any transactions, now if you had a rush payment to prepare for someone, so you got an invoice and it's a rush payment, and you need to process this payment alone, you do not have to enter an invoice, exit the screen, and then go to another screen, right, to process that payment. Now, if you want, you can enter the invoice and process the invoice in this one screen. As you can see, we have the amount entered. So let's say, for example, we are going to do a check payment or a down payment, for example. You are able to enter a check number. So you can enter the check amount, say 500. And the system is going to generate a check number. It is also going to generate a payment number. We are going to accept this, and it's also going to show you what checkbook it's going to come out from. So once you say okay, it would show that the payment would be against this particular invoice. All right, but I'm not going to do a I am not going to do a check payment. So let's select this again. And it's always advisable to whatever change that you make as well, you also click on the distribution. You always click on the distribution and verify that your distributions are also available for the transaction that you're entering the transaction for. Because what tends to happen, if you save and you come and make a change within the window, the distributions are not going to be updated. So you are going to have to go back into distributions and you would have to click default. Default is like a reset option. So let's say, for example, and I'm just going to redo one that we can see. If I was to create a new transaction, so we're going to create a new invoice. And we're going to do this for $900. Currently, my distribution is set to 900. I am going to save this to a batch. And I'm going to save. I'm also going to enter my document number. And like I said, if you had a PO number, you can also enter that as well. If I was to bring up and I was to change, let's say we make this change to 1200. Right, the distributions are still going to show 900. What you can do is use the reset, and the reset is going to make that change. So it's going to reflect the new change that you made after you have saved. Right? So this allows you to reset. The system is now going to take the information or the GLs from the vendor and reset the purchasing and pay amount back to the correct GL amount. So we're going to say okay, right? So any adjustments to the distributions, right? You are going to have to use the reset. Now, if you had broken this out into several accounts, right, and you did a reset, the broken out changes that you would have done previously would need to be redone. All right. And I only did this because I processed an invoice only, and then I came back again and make a change. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And I want to post this batch. So let's go back to payables batch. And let's look for our batch. Right, and I'm going to go ahead and post. Now I may not be able to print a screen because my printer seems to be giving problems, but let's see what happens. All right, so yes, so as I suspected. So the information was not able to print to screen as due to my printers giving trouble. However, not all the reports you may find useful. Whichever reports you don't use, those can also be turned off. That way, when you post, you're not prompted with 4 or 5 reports. All right. So my entry has been posted. Expenses and bank would be affected, right? Payables has not been affected yet because the invoice has not yet been paid. So there's no payable amount. And of course, once you print the reports, you are going to have an audit trail code. And that audit trail code is going to sit in a batch and update the batch as well. So we're going to check to see if the payables transaction is sitting in a batch waiting to be updated. And because none of the reports would print with a journal number, it means that the document, the transaction, sorry, would be sitting in a batch and our checkbook would have been updated. So if we were to check our financials and under our transaction window, and let's go to batches. And we're going to look for that PMTRX. One second. Yeah. Okay, so due to the error that I'm receiving, it's affecting the posting. Okay, so guys, what you should be seeing here, and it's due to the error, I'm not currently seeing it. What you should be seeing here is a PM transaction batch ID. That PM transaction batch ID, you are going to be able to pull it in, like if you would pull in a PM check, for example, right? So the origin is going to be PM TRX, right? So what that would do is pull in all the payables transactions into that batch that you have in GP, right? So if you wanted to also go to your own batch, you can do that. All right. So, let me just also, I'm just bringing up here as well. You are going to see the accounts listed for the batch ID. Unfortunately, like I said, I can't show you the transaction batch because of the error that I'm receiving currently in GP, right? But once you post the batch in Payables, you are going to be able to come to the financial window. You're going to be able to do the lookup, and you should see a batch ID called PMTRX. That PMTRX batch, when you drill in the transactions, you would see the distribution accounts associated with that transaction. Then what you would do from here, you would then post the transaction, right? And because this batch, for example, if the batch in particular had multiple journal entries, multiple transactions, you are able to give the batch a unique name, right? So you can take it out of the batch with the other transactions, and you are able to post it to only take it out for one of that transaction. So if, for example, I was going to if I wanted to, this only currently has one transaction in it. But if, for example, you did have multiple transactions, you would click on transactions, you would give the batch ID a different name, you would save that transaction under your new batch ID. So say, for example, PMT Pay1. Right? And you are able to use this batch and post that journal right into the system, because that journal would now be committed to GP. So it would now move from the work status to the posting status in GP. All right. And if it is you wanted to look for the journal under the financial, you would go to the inquiry window. So under financials, you would bring up your inquiry window. And in the inquiry window is where you can look for that journal entry. So you can either type in, or you can either use the lookup and you can pull the journal, your journal entry within the system. Now, the advantage here, because the transaction has been posted, and I'm just going to see if there is anyone that we can use. I'm just going to pull anyone in the system, right? So the advantage here is that you have something called source documents. And this source document is blue and underlined. So now you're able to drill into the transaction. If it was this in the state where it was unposted, you would not be able to drill within the transaction. All right. So if it's posted, you can click into the source entry and it's going to go drill back into the transaction, right? So I do apologize, I was not able to actually show you that process, but hopefully me explaining the process as well kind of gave you a bit of an insight, right? Now, if you need to trace transactions to the GL under purchasing, you are able to go to posting journals, right? And if you need to trace the transactions under whichever module it is, you go to reports, your posting journals, and there are different type of journals here because in Payables, there's a lot of them. And in our case, it would have been the transaction journal, and you would print that particular journal for that particular date range, or if you know your audit trail code, you can enter that audit trail code, and you should be able to locate your transactions that way and locate it or retrace it back to the GL. All right, so that is it on the invoice entry. So let's see. Right. And now that I'm in the inquiry window, let me just speak briefly about these three statuses here: work, open, and history. So when you're looking up information, you can select whichever checkbox you want based on which status you believe the transaction is in. And you click redisplay. All right. So work means that the transactions have been saved to a batch. They have not yet been posted, right? They have not yet been committed to GP. They are in a saved state. Then open means that the transaction have been posted. So in Payables, as long as a transaction has been posted, it would move from the work state to that open status. And the third status of history, or the historical status, it means that the transaction has not only been posted, but it has also been fully applied. So for example, if you have an invoice of $100 or $101, for example, and a payment for let's say $100, and that payment has been applied to that invoice will still show as open because it has $1 remaining on it to still be applied, right? So it is going to show in that open status until it has been fully applied. Whereas the payment of $100 has been fully applied to that $101 invoice. So the payment is going to show as history or under the historical status. So I'm just checking to see if there's an invoice here that's in the open status. So it's posted and not yet fully applied. So I am just checking to see what I have here. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple. Let's see this one. Right, so this one is for 8,355. And this is a kind of old one. That says 142. Let's see. All right, so we have one. This is a return. All right, so we have a couple of invoice transactions here. So what we can also do, you can also do we're going to do a credit transaction. I'm just going to take a screenshot. So I would have the information. MCT 1082 under the PO 2034 14222. And the item is 100XLG. Okay. So the vendor in this case is Advance. So I'm going to go back to my transaction entry window, where you can also process a credit memo as well. I'm going to select the advanced vendor. My document number, I can call CN99, and you can put in your amount. And now notice that we are in the same window that we created the invoice, but because we are creating a credit memo, certain fields are grayed out. So where you would have been creating an invoice, these fields would have been visible to use, but because you're creating a credit memo, the credit memo and the invoice differ. And also you have an apply button, right, that we did not have before, because when you're doing credit memos, it is understood that when you create a credit memo, you would need to apply to some document within your system if you have anything to apply to, right? So if you click apply, right, you can see that there are a range of documents for you to apply to. Now, this was the document for 142.30 that we would have seen when we looked in the inquiry window. So you are able to select it and apply that payment and click OK. All right. So then you're going to do a transaction level post. So you can do a transaction level post and click post. Right? It's saying that the fiscal period is not set up. So let's do it has so many errors today. Okay, so the errors that I'm receiving, and I want to apologize, guys. It's not allowing me to post. But once you post on the screen, you are going to see all your posting journals, etc. And you are going to be able to verify that with your credit memo, right? You're going to see the information in your report summary and your details in your detail reports. And your check register document would not have any information because you're processing a credit memo. And similarly, your checkbook posting journal would not have anything once posted because you're creating a credit memo as well. All right. I am going to end this session preemptively, only because I don't want to continue with the error that I'm currently receiving on my GP still. So we would have to postpone the session to another day, and I do apologize. I'm not sure why I'm getting all these pop-ups currently. So Gabo, I'm not sure who's still there. Maria?
Yes, Sansayo.
All right, so I'm going to end this session.
Okay, perfect.
Right? So I would like to
Yes.
thank everyone, however, for joining.